So, before we start with the questions, can I ask you to provide an introduction about yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Julia Riew. I am a composer-lyricist and a writer, and I live in New York City.
Nice, perfect. And you are currently working on a lot of projects, as I read on your website, and we'll be discussing that later. But for now, some general questions first. So, first of all, you have navigated storytelling across multiple mediums, from musical theater to novels. How does your creative process shift when moving between these formats? And what challenges have you encountered in preserving your voice and narrative?
Really good question. You know, it's quite interesting because I think storytelling across mediums, storytelling as a thing, I have a very similar approach to how I think about stories, and yet the medium really, really changes what is required of me as a writer. So for
Mhm.
example, like if I'm writing a book, there's no music. When you're writing a musical, there's very, very specific kind of structure that it takes on where and you know, it really depends on the musical, but the approach I usually take is that the songs are almost like I've heard it described as beads on a necklace, where the
Mhm.
script is like the chain and the beads are the songs, and they all come together to make the necklace. And that's a very kind of specific structure versus when you're writing a book, you are well, I guess the biggest difference is that when you're writing a book, you're doing everything. So like in
Mhm.
theater is a really, really collaborative medium where you are just, for example, if I'm the book music and lyrics, I'm just writing the words and the music, and there's a set designer, there's a director, there are actors who come and play all the roles. When I'm writing a book, especially even when I collaborate with my brother, we still
Mhm.
have to build that entire world. So we have to describe everything that people are wearing, what people look like, where people are moving. And when I'm writing musicals, there's a director who dictates the blocking, and I'll do a little bit of movement in the stage direction. But I would say writing a book is a lot more of a solitary experience. It's a lot less collaborative, even though you're working with
Mhm.
your editor or potentially a collaborator. And it requires a lot more um, just sort of understanding of the world that you're building by yourself versus working all together. So I would say that that's the biggest difference that pops out to me. I think there are a lot of structural differences as well, where books you kind of have a lot more room to. There are books that wander around and just write thing after thing after thing. There are books that move locations every 5 seconds, and
Mhm.
and you can't really do that on a stage production. There are a lot of just like things that the medium dictates. But overall, I mean, the purpose of storytelling is, for me, the same, which is to share some kind of message, to
Mhm.
help increase empathy in some regard, or to help represent my communities that I'm a part of. Um, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I was thinking about how like you can do both and seemingly they're very different, but as you kind of break it down, I feel like it's important that you just preserve the central message around it and you can vary a lot of other outside factors around it to like produce the same thing. So,
Totally.
that's really neat. And a follow-up to that question is your musical dive based on like an actual piece of writing or did it originate in the form of like a play?
So, Dive is based on a Korean folktale called Shimcheong, which is
Mhm.
kind of like some people say, like the Cinderella of Korea. It's a very well known folktale that goes back centuries and centuries, passed down through oral tradition. And so, there's a bunch of different versions of it. The original senior thesis production of Dive was, I would say, loosely inspired by the folktale Shimcheong, and in a
Mhm.
lot of ways inspired by my experience growing up. And now the current draft of Dive has is sort of using all of these things, including my senior thesis, as inspiration. And I also am writing a middle grade novel right now that's also
Mhm.
inspired by the same folk tale. So these stories kind of go together. But yeah, the original source material is just a folk tale.
Nice. And did you grow up in Korea or?
No, so I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, actually.
Oh, okay. So
Yeah.
you're just drawing on like your relationships and like connections, right? To this story?
Yeah, yeah. Well, so for the original senior thesis production, which
Hmm.
took a bit of a different direction back then, I was thinking about different things when I wrote it. And I started this project when I was 21. Yeah, 21, and I'm now 26, so I think my brain's kind of in a just slightly different place. But when I first wrote the that very first senior thesis draft, it was really about my experience understanding belonging, especially as someone who is part of a diaspora, someone who's a Korean person who has grown up in a place far away from Korea and then had the experience of going to Korea as an adult
Hmm.
and ultimately coming to understand that my cultural identity and my identity as a person can be something that is more than one thing and can be
Hmm.
part of two worlds. And so the original story was sort of about the protagonist coming to grapple with the fact that she is someone of two worlds.
Hmm.
And that was the original inspiration for the story, but it's gone in a slightly different direction since
I'm excited to watch it because
then.
as you say that, I think about like how I can relate to the story as well because
Mhm.
I was born in China. I grew up there, but at a young age, I immigrated to the US and
Mm,
I've stayed here ever since. So I've been trying to connect my two cultures as I get older, but
mhm,
I'm confident that like in the future, I'm going to explore more of that as well. So
mhm.
I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And I noticed that your original title, as you mentioned, was Shimchung instead of Dive. And is there a story behind why you changed the title? And what is actually the significance of Shimchung?
Yeah, totally. So Shimchung is the name of the original folk tale. So that would be like, if the story is based on Cinderella, it was just called Cinderella.
Uh-huh.
That being said, the folk tale takes my adaptation is its own news story. And I think in the same way I was sort of taking inspiration from the way that like um Tangled is not called Rapunzel, it's called Tangled, and Frozen
Mm.
isn't called the Snow Queen because they are sharing a new kind of story. And I think I wanted to make it clear that this is not the Shimchung. This is its own story that takes inspiration from Shimchung.
Mm.
And I think a lot of this story ended up being about this concept of like taking a metaphorical and a physical dive in order to step into this new part of your life. And
Oh.
in many ways, that was also I also, because Dive ended up being the song that went viral from the show,
Mhm.
it sort of went hand in hand, and that Dive is the song that people know from it, and it's also really in a great way symbolizes the story that I wrote for it.
Mhm.
And so it was really wanting to establish it as its own story that takes inspiration from this folktale but isn't necessarily the actual folktale.
Mm. That makes a lot more sense. I was like, the anecdotes that you drew from like Cinderella and Tangled really help because that
Yeah.
like opened a new perspective for me. I never thought a lot about like how the movie title isn't actually like the character's
Right.
name. But
Right, totally. Well, I think like sometimes it is like with Mulan, you do have that,
yeah.
but um I think it's interesting. A lot of these Disney movies are based on actually like really dark stories.
Mhm. I've
And
I've heard about that.
likewise, Shimchung, the original story, is a pretty dark story and has actually received a lot of criticism over the years for its representation of women and how
Mm.
women are portrayed and how the most important thing portrayed is filial piety. And I think that now that, hundreds and hundreds of years have passed, we have sort of a different value system today. And so
Mhm.
I think also being able to differentiate between there's this traditional version of the story that we really respect and that we really want to uphold, but we also want to be able to create a new story that feels relevant for the people of today and that feels relatable and like something that people today want to see and hear. So
Yeah,
it's
for sure.
like an adaptation. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And music is deeply intertwined within your storytelling, such as the Windward Side and Dive. Could you describe how you weave musical elements into your novels, such as the process for creating lyrical composition, or how music influences your writing process overall?
Mm. It's so funny because I think I have to sit back and I'm like, does music influence my novel writing? I think it really does. And if anything, it's really the I think of everything in terms of scope, like wave and memory. Wave and rhythm.
Hmm.
And I think when I'm say just writing a piece of prose, like if I'm just writing a book,
Hmm.
even that book has rhythm to it, and even every scene has rhythm to it. Every piece of dialogue has rhythm to it, and even what I just said, like I just the way I repeated,
Yeah.
and like that's often when I'm writing music, I'm thinking about how the rhythm and the flow feels, and that's the same thing when I'm writing a scene. I'm not necessarily thinking of it as literal music, but I am thinking about how does this read, how is this feeling, and what is the audience experiencing when they're looking at these
Hmm.
words in the order that they're in. And that's a really really similar part of my brain that creates lyrics and that creates song structure. um so I'm not literally I'm not I might not literally be thinking about music while I'm writing, but I think it's the same part of my brain that crafts the structure of scenes when I'm writing books.
Yeah, I think writing books and creating like musical composition, they're really similar, and like they make your brain think in a certain way that you wouldn't otherwise have that structure. And like the
Totally,
rhythm thing that
totally.
you said, that's really interesting because when I'm reading books, I for school, we sometimes have to analyze like the author's purpose and stuff like that. So I think that really coincides with each other too. So that makes a lot of
Yeah, well, I
sense.
really think every creative process has some kind of music to it, whether
Hmm.
you're painting something and thinking about how it's all coming together and the layers, which is quite similar to when you're, say, orchestrating something and thinking about the different layers that you're building into the music. I think they're all
Hmm.
quite connected. Um, and when you're writing dialogue, you're discovering patterns in the speech, which is similar to when you're discovering the musical style of a character and how they sing and how they express themselves. So I think these things are all pretty related.
Yeah. And do you ever think of like certain songs when you write your books that may like
I
influence your
make
mood?
I do make playlists. It
Oh,
helps me like
yes.
get in the feeling of the character, you know, like oh,
Mhm.
like coming up with it's always just fun to also to build playlists
Uh-huh.
for
Yeah.
any purpose. But I love building playlists for my characters. It helps me sort of
Mhm.
get into the zone and get into their feelings and get
Yeah.
into their it sometimes it unlocks something because you're like, oh my gosh, like this character totally would feel this way. And just capturing a certain emotion can really help you bring that out in the story.
And doesn't it feel like astonishing how like you created all the characters? Like you can literally alter how the characters feel, how like their emotional complex. Like you have all the power to do that. And I think that's just so
Well,
amazing.
it's crazy. I mean, it's crazy coming from a very predominantly theater background. It's kind of bizarre because I
Mhm.
so much of my experience as a writer, I'm very used to creating the blueprint for a character, but then creating characters that can be interpreted again and again in different ways. Whereas in a book, you're actually just creating this version of the like you're like this is the character in this version of the story. And unless you adapt it later into a movie, you don't really have that experience. It's really it lives in
Mhm.
your brain and the brains of the audience members. Audience, you don't even call. I mean, I see. I'm literally thinking audience member, but it's your readers. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I think it's a very different sort of way of the relationship between the author and the readers is so different from the relationship between like a playwright and the audience, but also
yeah. Mhm.
very similar in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Would it be hard to like portray your emotions or what you're trying to say through a page instead of like in a theater where you they can actually see your face expressions and other factors like that?
I think it really depends. I mean, sometimes it's actually easier because when you're reading something, that thing is getting transmitted directly into your brain. Whereas when you go see something in a theater, first of all, you might be sitting really far away. You might just literally not be able to see the actor's face.
Mhm.
But when you can, I think everyone sees the world a little bit differently, and everyone
Mhm.
imagines the world a little bit differently. So everyone's going to have a little bit of a different experience, whether they're sitting in a theater or whether they're reading a book. And I think either way, you don't, as a creator, you don't really have much control over the way the audience interprets your work. It's more a matter of doing the best you can to communicate what you hope to communicate, and then I think
Mhm.
it's up to a lot of. Sorry, you were freezing, and I wasn't sure if.
Oh.
Oh, the image was freezing a little. I wasn't sure. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think it just comes down to you can represent emotions on stage and in books, and I think it's different, but it's going to be different for the consumer
I
depending on the
totally agree. I
medium.
totally agree. As long as you have your message and you're trying to convey that, I think that's enough. And everyone else can have their
Yeah,
like own interpretations and stuff like that too.
yeah.
Okay, now we're gonna move on to your debut novel, The Last Tiger, which is coming out in early August, I believe. I'm so excited to read it, and everyone go pre-order right now on Amazon. All right. So, The Last Tiger was inspired by your grandparents' story of the Korean War. How did you approach translating such personal and historical narratives into a universal story that resonates with a broader audience?
Totally. Well, I think, just not even to answer that specifically to the book, but my opinion, my thought is that the more specific your narrative is, the more universal it will actually be. I think something that maybe early creators feel, or something that I felt in my early experience of being a writer, was that I had to tell a story that everyone related to, but there's no such
Mhm.
thing as that. And I think you can tell with pieces of art that are trying to fit every single group or tackle every single social issue, or like represent literally everyone, actually ends up representing no one in a way. And the more specific you get, I mean, everyone feels emotions. Everyone has suffered. Everyone has been through harrowing experiences. And so I think it's not actually the goal as a storyteller should never be how can I make sure everyone feels represented by this story, but rather how can I tell a really authentic story? Because the more authentic
Mhm.
and specific your story is, the more that other people will then be able to extrapolate their own emotions and be able to understand and process and relate to it, I think, in a way. So for The Last Tiger specifically, so my brother and I started by reading through all of our grandparents, anything that they'd written down, listening to times that we'd interviewed them, talking to them. Unfortunately, my grandpa passed away in 2020, so
Mhm.
he never got to hear about the story that we're writing. But he had written down in 2016 a large portion of his love story with my grandma. And he had sent me that file, so I had that file, and then I had a bunch of writing that my grandmother had done in 2020 after my grandpa passed away. She wrote down a bunch of her life story, and so we had that as reference material as well. And
Mhm.
then we wanted to write a YA fantasy novel, and so we took a lot of inspiration from the kinds of work that we really enjoyed reading at the age that we were writing for. But we're also writing, it's YA isn't just for young people, it's for people of all ages.
Mhm.
um and then it was actually not very. I would say that the challenge wasn't really coming from. Oh, it says trying to reconnect, make sure you have a stable internet connection. Okay, I think it's fine though.
Yeah, I think we're good. I think we're good.
Okay. Um, the challenge didn't come so much from us wondering how do we make sure this appeals to a broad audience, but rather just trying to tell a good story. Our focus was always just to tell a good story, and to tell a story that fit our specific mission and our
Mhm.
message, which was that even in the face of really great suffering, like the suffering that our grandparents went through when they were young, and the challenges that they went through when they were young, they were still able to meet their moment. They were still able to find each other and let love prevail over everything. And that was really the mission of the story, and that was the thing that we were trying to tell. So we weren't actually even bothering thinking about who is our audience, how do we make this commercially global, how do we make this feel like everyone relates to it. It was really more like, how do we tell a story that we feel like honors our grandparents' story and will be helpful to the young people of today.
Hmm. That was a really beautiful response. First of all, I never I never realized like the mindset that you had to go really specific. Well, you had to go really specific to make other people relate. And I feel like what's important is that, like you said, the more authentic your story is, the more that people can relate to it. And I mean, everybody has their own authentic stories. So the circle just gets bigger and bigger. But that was really beautiful. I'm going to take that into my life too.
Awesome.
That was really inspiring.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. I mean, I feel like you should never feel the need to appeal to everybody, because once you're trying to appeal to everybody, you kind of get lost in the sauce.
Mhm.
And being authentically yourself and telling the stories that you authentically want to tell is how you will ultimately best represent yourself. And then the people will come from there.
Yeah, for sure. Next question. What would you say is the message that you want to convey through this novel? I know we touched on it a little, but
Mhm.
what's the message? And does it have anything to do with any motifs like love, adventure, or any other themes?
Yeah, absolutely. I sort of touched on this in the last answer, but essentially, the message of The Last Tiger is that even in the darkest of times, and even when it seems like all odds are against you, if you lead with love, you will find the light at the end of the tunnel. When my grandpa was young, he told us this story about when he was right after his dad had died, and he was taking care of his entire family. He had become the breadwinner of his family, and he was still a kid himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he had this dream that there was a huge mountain in front of him, and that he had to cross over the mountain, and he just had no idea how he was going to make it to the other side. And I think a lot of people feel that way in various times of their lives, whether it's like, how am I going to apply to college? How am I
Mm-hmm. For
going
sure.
to pursue, how am I going to make my way in this industry that is so tough? How am I going to deal with the death of a loved one? I feel like it often feels like there's a giant mountain ahead of us, and we don't always know how we're going to cross over it, and that's okay. um, and just knowing that he and my grandmother were able to grow their love in such a difficult time during
Mm-hmm.
Japanese occupation, during a time when his father had died and he was dealing with extreme poverty and hunger and war and separation. And on top of that, was he and my grandmother were not allowed to date each other and had this forbidden romance. And yet they were still able to make it through thanks to their love for each other.
Mm-hmm.
That is essentially the message of The Last
Yeah, that is beautiful. I'm really excited to read it. Wow.
Tiger.
And adding on to that, kind of, do you see how this novel can reflect either your own personal life or cultural experiences that you have experienced in the past or maybe in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of Brad and I have been talking a lot when we were creating this novel, a lot about suffering. It sounds really dark, but basically, a lot of people don't know that while we were writing this novel, Brad, and he still is, um, he got long COVID in 2020 and was has basically been dealing with chronic fatigue and long COVID throughout the entirety of us writing this book.
Mhm.
And so much of that has been just a very harrowing experience for him and for our family, where he, often can't get up out of bed and is unable to do a lot of the things that most people living here in New York City are able to do, to go for a walk, to go to the park, to see friends, all these things. And so and I in my own ways have dealt with struggle and things that are seemingly insurmountable, and different kinds of loss and different kinds of pain,
Mhm.
and throughout that, one thing Brad and I talked a lot about is maintaining your dignity, even when circumstances come into your life that you cannot control, and even when there are things in your life that make you feel very small and make you feel very useless or powerless, you still have the power to do what's right, and you still have the power to choose love over
Hmm.
violence.
Yeah.
So a lot of it definitely draws from our personal experience.
That's what makes the story authentic, right? Like you experience it yourself, your family also experience it. And I think what's beautiful about it is that you have the ability, you have the power to translate that narrative to other people too, and essentially allow other people to feel how you felt or insert their own emotions too. I think that's a really
Totally.
powerful thing. All right. If you were to describe this book in 3 words, what would they be and why?
Ooh, interesting question.
Hmm.
Um, the word, they don't have to. Is it like a phrase or is it like
They
just
can
three
they can be
individual
a
words?
phrase. They can be a phrase or a word.
Ooh, ooh. Gotta think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I would say, well, I want to start with adjective. It's funny because somebody actually recently asked me this about my. I'm engaged, and so I'm like planning a wedding, and like
Uh-huh.
they're like,
Oh
"What are
my
the three
god.
words you would use to describe your wedding?" And I was like, "Ooh, like kind of like." So I feel like that's kind of the angle I'm going at. Like I'm going for vibes. So if we're
Okay.
going
Yeah,
for
yeah,
like
yeah.
vibes, then I would say adventurous,
Mhm.
romantic, and inspiring.
For
Hopefully
sure.
inspiring.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That but if you were to make it into like a quirky phrase or like a pun.
Okay, quirky phrase. Pun. I mean, I like the title's 3 words, The Last Tiger, but that's a cop out answer. Um, I would say, what would I say?
It's hard.
Something. Oh, okay. Something with the word rebellion in it, because there's two
Okay.
kinds of rebellion in the story.
Mhm. Okay.
It's like it would be like something like forbidden rebellion.
Yeah,
Um,
forbidden. Forbidden.
like something forbidden rebellion, or like forbidden something like forbidden love rebellion, basically. I think that kind of encapsulates the story in a way, in that they are literally rebelling against the government in the story. Like they're rebelling against the colonial regime, which is
Mhm.
a forbidden act that they are doing due to love, but they are also rebelling against the wishes of their parents,
Mm.
because it's a forbidden love story, and they're like sneaking out at night, and like there's also that element of rebellion. So I would say forbidden love rebellion.
Okay, that's perfect. I think this exercise, like, think of 3 words, think of a phrase, is, like, kind of hard because I'm a junior right now, so I'm starting to think of colleges and stuff, and
Mm,
sometimes on your college apps, you have to say, you have to have a narrative and, like, what are
hmm.
3 words that
Totally,
describe you? And, like, this
totally.
exercise is just really opening brain cells
Yeah.
right now, but
Well, it's funny because the truth is, like, no one can be described in 3 words,
exactly,
but
and, like,
words are really powerful, and you can actually do a lot with. You can. No one can be completely described in 3 words, but 3 words can go really far to describe somebody.
yeah, and you can't use words like unique, funny, stuff
Yeah.
like that. Like, that's just cliche.
Yeah. Totally.
But yeah,
Totally.
it's a process I'm going through in August, so I have mixed emotions about
Oh
it.
my gosh. I remember those days.
Oh my
Oh, I
god.
remember those days.
Yep. Okay. Great. I'm so excited to read the novel, and after hearing your insights, I'll definitely gain a new perspective to the book as well. So, next, we're actually going to finish our interview with a few general questions. First of all, as a young creator, you've obviously already achieved incredible success in a competitive industry. What advice would you offer to emerging writers specifically? who aim to carve their own path in industry?
It's so funny because I feel like success has there's so many different ways to interpret success, and I think
Uh-huh.
it is funny. This is an industry where I think a lot of people feel like it's they see things very differently. But okay, my advice for young people, young aspiring writers, number one is write. And that's going to sound really like self-explanatory, but I think a lot of people get are afraid to write something bad. And I would say like that's what you're that's what being young is for. It's for failing so that you can get better. And so I think I guess the real advice behind that advice is don't be afraid of failure, and don't be afraid of creating something bad, because that's you have to create everything as you create, you'll get better and better. So of course the first stuff that you're creating is not going to be incredible. And have faith in yourself. And the if you're sitting around thinking about all the things you want to write but not taking action, at the end of the day, how can you get better if you don't even start? So I think one of the
Mhm.
really important things is, while you're young, while you have that neuroplasticity, of course we all have neuroplasticity, we still have neuroplasticity, but like while you're cooking, cook, um because you'll learn more about you and your voice, and then you'll be able to get to a place where you know what your style is, and you know who you are, and you know what kind of stories you like telling and you want to tell. So don't be afraid to actually create whatever kind of art you want to create. Just do it, and
Mhm.
do it badly, and then do it better the next time. um, so that would be the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice would be, if you're a I mean, so much of it just has to do with, don't lead with fear. Don't worry about what people will think of it,
Mhm.
and show your work to people, because that can lead to building great collaborations, building great mentorships, and even possibly opportunities. Um, so those are the two kind of broad strokes things. And then the other stuff I would say is like, make a website. You don't have to be like an internet celebrity to do art, but it's really great if you have some of your work online, whether you're a composer or an actor or a writer. Just, if you're a writer, maybe you can have a blog where you just talk about what projects you're working on, so that people, you can, in a way, hold yourself accountable. But also, if you're in the entertainment industry, often if you want to be considered commercially successful, you need to be discovered. So be discoverable and have work that can be discovered, and then be in places where you can be discovered. So go to events and share your work with people. Make yourself a website where you have your resume and your portfolio or whatever it is. And if you are a social media person, you can put it on social media, although that opens a whole new can of worms. So that's, just very person dependent. Um, and just keep creating, I think, is the number one thing.
They can go a long way, and especially,
Sorry.
like, they're really impactful for, like, actual teenagers like me, because it's just reassuring to hear someone tell you, like, "Just do it." Like, you don't have to fear, you don't have to be afraid of, like, failure, and I think that will go a long way in my life, so,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally.
All right. And last question. Looking ahead, do you have any particular projects, whether in theater, literature, or other creative mediums, that you're hoping and working to bring to life in the future?
Yeah, I'm working on a musical right now called Endless. And we're actually doing a concert in like 2.5 weeks. Is it all 3 weeks? 2.5
Wow.
weeks? Oh
Uh-huh.
my gosh, 2 weeks. um, so I've been developing that musical, which is supposed to premiere in Korea, and then will ultimately come back here. And then Brad and I are working on our second book right now,
Mm.
which is
A
not in
sequel?
the same world as the first book. No, it's a sci-fi thriller, YA sci-fi thriller.
Okay,
So
YA. Wow, wait, I'm excited. Are you guys in the process of writing that, or?
yeah, so we are. I actually just hopped off of a collaboration call to come here, and then I'm gonna hop right back on after this. And we're gonna keep powering through.
Oh, okay. Okay. And do you know when you guys are gonna like release it or like the expected date, maybe?
2027 is the expected date, but
Okay.
don't quote me on
That's nice.
that.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. I'll be on the lookout. I'll be on the lookout. And that's all the questions I have for you.
No, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, feel free to let me know how things are going.
Yes.
Have a good
Bye.
rest
Thank
of your day.
you.
Bye.
Bye.